So welcome back to the program on tenders. We are at module 3, and in this module we are going to learn about how to plan for tenders. What does it mean when we talk about the term planning for tenders? As we discussed in the previous module, that every tender goes through 4 stages. The pre-tender stage, which is essentially the stage for planning for tender, then tender document preparation, then opening of tender, and then tender finalization. So we are discussing planning for tender, and we are going to discuss this topic in detail. Now, in terms of planning for tender, there are certain procedures which are mandatory for in Indian Railways, and these are taken from Indian Railway Engineering Code or Indian Railway Finance Code, right? So in terms of Indian Railway Engineering Code, it says that no work can be undertaken unless a detailed estimate of the work has been sanctioned. So the point number 1 is whenever we are planning for tender, we have to ensure that detailed estimate, as a rule, we have to ensure that detailed estimate for the work is sanctioned. There could be exceptions to rule, and those exceptions can be exercised only by very senior authorities like General Manager of Railways. But as a norm, as a practice, any work can only be started when the detailed estimate for the work is sanctioned. And this is as per paragraph 1102 of Engineering Code, right? The same paragraph also states that the works can be undertaken only when funds have been allocated. There is a site where which is ready to be handed over to the contractor. Railway is ready with design, detailed drawing and schedule of quantities, and tender document is ready. So when it comes to planning for tender, these 5 points are important: sanction of detailed estimates, fund availability, readiness of site, readiness of drawings, detailed drawings, schedule of quantities, and preparedness of tender document. And we are going to talk about each of those five things right now. Now, what is a detailed estimate? Now, detailed estimate, there are various sorts of estimates which are there before any work can be started. An estimate is nothing but a statement of cost, and there are multiple forms of estimates which are prevalent in Indian Railways. So there is abstract estimate, which is a very early estimation of works, which is different from detailed estimation. The difference between abstract and detailed is abstract can be a rough approximate cost of work, whereas detailed, when it comes to detailed estimation, then we do a detailed costing of all the activities and materials which are needed to finish a particular work. Now, this is defined in more detail in paragraph 703 of Engineering Code, so para 703 of Engineering Code, and it says that detailed estimate will comprise of statements showing details of estimated costs, an outer sheet giving the abstract of cost of work, a report, and a financial justification, and the allocation of expenditure. So it has 3 essential parts: a statement of detailed cost, an outer sheet, which is simpler, but a report and financial justification. A report is essentially why this work is needed, the scope of work, what benefits can railway achieve from spending this money, and allocation means to what account head is the money, is the expenditure going to be charged. Now, a sample pro forma of detailed estimate for, let's say, the work of complete track renewal can be as follows. So, a complete track renewal is nothing but if there is a railway track, then the existing rails and sleepers and fish plates, they are changed, and these are changed, replaced with a new one. So, a detailed estimate will say that detailed estimate has been prepared for so many kilometers of complete track renewal, which starts from kilometerage number, let's say 101 to 104 kilometers, which means 3 kilometers of track renewal has to happen. Now, for that kilometerage, we have to now assess how many, what quantity of rails have to be changed, and broadly the specification of that item. So it's 60 kg 90 UTS rail which has to be used. What quantity of such rail has to be procured? So it can be in running meters. So 3 kilometers or 3,000 meters of rail, and 3,000 meters of rail on both sides, 2 tracks, so which means 6,000 meters of rail has to be procured. And then whatever is the standard rate for procurement of 3,000 of 1,000 meter of rail or 1 meter of rail, and then you multiply quantity into rate to get the total amount. Similarly, we can also make estimate for how many fish plates are required for complete track renewal of 3 kilometers of rail section. So if this rail section is of 3 kilometers, and in every section, if we require, let's say, 1,770 sleepers, then for every sleeper, there will be 2 fish plates on both sides. So 1770 into 2, that is 3540, 3540 multiplied by 3 kilometers, it's something like 10,620 fish plates would be required, and then multiplied with the rate to get the quantity. Then on every fish plate, we also know how many nuts and bolts are required. So multiplied with the number of fish plates, number of nuts and bolts, so we get the quantity of nuts and bolts. Then if there is load bearing plate, then we can also make the estimate of load bearing plate. We can also make estimate of sleepers. And finally, when all the material has been supplied, then we require enough manpower to take out the old rail and replace it with the new rail. So labor required to execute the work. Now, this detail in this line by line detailing of cost is essential for preparation of detailed estimate. Okay, so detailed estimate is nothing but a cost statement, a detailed cost statement, which is line by line, a cost statement which gives estimate of assessment of quantity and the rates to give the final amount, and then a grand total amount for each of the items required to complete the work. The second item in tender planning stage is to prepare the tender schedule. Now, tender schedule is different from detailed estimate, and in what sense I can just explain to you, and I need your attention. So, a detailed estimate can have multiple tenders. So for example, if we had this detailed estimate, we can have a separate tender for supply of rails, because these rails would come from steel units. It could be Steel Authority of India, it could be Rashtriya Ispat Nigam, and those sort of agencies, right? Fish plates can come from different agencies, so there could be separate tender for fish plates. So there could be a number of foundries which make fish plate, and these foundries have to be authorized and vetted by railways to undertake production of fish plates. So a tender for supply of fish plate can be a separate tender. There could be separate tender for nuts and bolts, because the units which supply could be different. There could be separate tender for sleepers. Now sleepers are, as you are aware, and you can see there are also various types. There are PCC sleepers, so precast concrete sleepers. There could be steel sleepers. So depending on what type of sleeper, we can have a different contract for sleeper, and then we can have different contract for supply of labor. So one detailed estimate or one work can have multiple tenders, right? So when we are thinking of preparation of tender schedule, our job is to prepare tender schedule for each of the items that we want to procure. Now, a tender schedule typically contains details of item that we want to procure, our own estimate of rate at which we want to procure. It will also have the specifications of item that we want to procure, and quantities to be procured. Right? It provides a standard template of format or a form in which the bidders are supposed to quote item wise or lump sum schedule wise or lump sum, and I'm going to explain in my next slide how these three are different, right? Uh, Now, every tender schedule has to be approved by a competent authority. It cannot be just approved by anyone and everyone. So in railway system, it has to be approved by a person who is minimum of the level of junior administrative grade, and that's where tender schedules have to be approved. If normally the tenders have to be called only after the sanction of detailed estimate, but if tenders are called without the sanction of detailed estimate, then prior finance vetting is mandatory. So that's the railway way of working. It cannot be bypassed. So, and finance vetting is there necessarily to ensure the canons of financial property, where we say that no one should be taking decisions for his own benefit, or it's a separation of powers, the technical power and financial power between two. Now, how are piece work, schedule work, and lump sum tenders different? Now, when we say of piecework, let's say we invited a bid for piecework rate, which means that the bidder. So this schedule, this tender schedule is for piecework. The bidder here has to. The railway administration will put the quantities. The bidder has to put rate for every item, and then calculate the total value for each of these line items, and then give the total value of work. Let's say we wanted 1 unit of rail, which is costing 50,000 rupees, then 1 into 50 is 50,000 rupees for item number 1. Now, for item number 1, if we require 1,000 units of fish plate, and each fish plate is available at 1,000 rupees, then 1,000 into 1,000 is 10 lakhs. So 10 lakhs for second item. Then nuts and bolts, similarly, if we require 5,000 nuts and bolts, and the rate of each nut and bolt is 50 rupees, then it is 2,50,000. So similarly, the grand total will be the total of each item. Now, this is piecework tender schedule. That contractor is been asked to give rate for every item. Now, when we request, when the tender is for piecework, then if I get quotes from party A, party B, and for line by line, if we see there is inter se variation for same item, then it gives us a better negotiation handle between the parties, right? So that is piecework. This is usually good for smaller values of work where items are less. Otherwise, if the items are too many, then it becomes too cumbersome. And in that sense, railway follows a practice of scheduled contract. Now, the same work can be broken into two schedules: Schedule A, which is for supply of items, and Schedule B, which is for supply of labor. So, supply of items are the first 5 items, which are essentially of supply nature. So, these are manufactured and these have to be supplied to railway administration. Whereas Schedule B is actually a works item, which means that we have to put in a lot of labor, and these labor will use these materials which have been supplied and then work on these materials to fix up the track. So I can have one tender which can have 2 schedules, Schedule A and Schedule B. Now, Schedule A, the tenderer has to give a gross rate for Schedule A. He does not have to give rate line by line rate for Schedule A, but we only indicate the quantity. All these lines are blank, and the tenderer is supposed to give a gross rate for Schedule A. We can play this thing differently. Railway in many cases will say that the standard expected rate of Schedule A is, let's say, 10 lakh rupees, and in that case tenderer is supposed to say that to give a rate which is over or below, percentage over or percentage below 10 lakh rupees. So a bidder can quote Schedule A standard rate 10 lakh rupees plus 10%, which means effectively his offer is of 11 lakh rupees. If a bidder quotes on a standard schedule rate of which is of 10 lakh rupees and his offer is minus 10%, then he is giving a 10% discount on the on the standard schedule rate of 10 lakh rupees, which means the effective value of schedule quoted by the bidder is 9 lakh rupees. So the bidder has to quote for Schedule A and Schedule B. And in both cases, he has to give a rate which is percentage above or below or equal to the standard rate for Schedule A and Schedule B. So if he is not giving a quote for Schedule B, then very often we can assume that the bidder is not interested in doing the work of Schedule B, and very often it can be taken as an invalid rate. The lump sum contract would mean essentially that we say that complete track renewal of 10 kilometers of track, including all material and labor, and we can give the material schedule which has to be supplied by the contractor, and the contractor is supposed to give one value for this. So he is not quoting for Schedule A or Schedule B, he is giving lump sum rate for both Schedule A and Schedule B together. So the difference between piecemeal, schedule wise and lump sum contract is that in piecemeal, item by item rate has to be quoted. In schedule, similar types of work is clubbed into one schedule. So all supply items clubbed into one schedule, or labor item clubbed into second schedule, and bidder has to quote for both schedules. And in a lump sum, everything, the work all together is clubbed into one item or schedule, and the bidder is supposed to quote for that that lump sum rate for the entire work. So that's how these three things are different. Now, that was what we meant by saying that in preparing for tender, we have to prepare the tender schedule. We have to make a decision whether we want to go for item rate contract, a schedule contract, or a lump sum contract. And it's a critical decision because there are trade-offs. There are benefits of this contracting, and there are benefits of lump sum contracting, right? So in this case, we can get item by item rate. There is a better price discovery. There is a better room for negotiation. But very often when the number of items run into 20, 30, 40, 50, 100, then it becomes extremely difficult to make any reasonable comparison in an item rate contract, right? It becomes very easy here in the lump sum contract. The trade-off is that we are not able to get line by line item costs, right? So in schedule, we know schedule wise cost for work. Now, while preparing, as we said, we also need to prepare, decide whether we are going for open tender, whether we are going for limited tender, whether we are going for special limited tender or single tender. Now, that decision, as we discussed before, is solely on the basis of whether there are extraneous circumstances, whether there are exigencies, because of which we want to go for limited tender, special limited tender, or single tender. But most often the standard practice is to go for open tender. Then we need to make a decision whether we are going for a single packet tender or a two packet tender. Now for small values work, for small to medium values work, railway has experienced that single packet is easy, and within single packet, what railway has done is they have created railway administration as a practice. We have created qualifying criteria for bidders, which makes decisions easier. In a two packet system, as we discussed in the previous session, in a two packet system, the technical bid is submitted in a separate packet, financial bid is submitted in a separate packet. First, the technical bid is opened, and only people who qualify on the technical criteria, their financial bids are open. So if the work is more complicated, if the work is more complex, then we go with two packet system, otherwise single packet system. Then with respect to staging, when we want to do discovery of how the work can be should be done, what is the best way of work to be performed. In those scenarios, we go for two-stage bid. In a two-stage bid, in stage one, we look for solutions. Every bidder provides solutions. The solutions provided by bidders could be unique. and then we firm up as our mind that which solution is the one that we should be going for, and then we request for price bid or a financial bid from parties who can provide those solutions. So that needs to be followed. If In addition, there are other things that we need to be pondering in terms of preparing for tender, which is uh, uh, what is the timeline for tender opening. The standard timeline for tender opening is 30 days. In special circumstances, we can bring it down to 21 days for open tenders. For special limited tender, the standard opening time is 21 days. It can be brought down to 15 days and even 10 days, and for single tender, even before. Now, depending on our situation, we can take those informed decisions. Those informed decisions are taken jointly by executive, and finance department is a party to several such decisions. If you have any questions with respect to planning for tender, you can mail us at this email ID. Thanks very much for attending this session.